Hey everyone, it's Norm from Tested, and welcome back to Projections, where this week we're going hands-on with some new hardware. That's right, HP has sent me a prototype of their upcoming Reverb G1 Windows Mixed Reality headset. We are super excited. Been using this for about a week now. Jeremy as well has had a chance to use this, and we've kind of collated our thoughts, and we're giving you some impressions about the experience of using this headset in its current state. Now, I say in its current state because this is not final hardware. It's mostly there in terms of the panels, the optics, and most of the experience, but this is not, for example, the final finish on the fit and finish on the headset itself. The final molds are done, the injection molds, and these are basically production samples from those molds, but whether it's how the pieces actually come together in the controllers or the kind of glossy back here, that's all going to be changed in the final version, as well as some tweaks that still need to be done. For example, calibration between the lenses and the panels for some clarity, as well as some of the audio drivers. That's not yet complete, but it is at a place where we can do some comparisons and show you and relay to you some of the experience of using this headset, because this is something we've been looking forward to very much since it was announced back in May. So first of all, let's talk about the state of PCVR headsets. There's basically three different ecosystems of headsets right now. There's of course the Oculus platform, for which there's the Oculus Quest, that mobile VR headset that you can also tether to a computer and play desktop PC VR games, as well as the Oculus Rift S, that's a native PC-only VR headset. There's also Steam VR, and that includes on the very high end the Valve Index, which is personally still my personal favorite VR headset, as well as the HTC Cosmos, which uses Steam VR. That one is inside-out tracking, and among those headsets has the highest resolution at 2880 by 1700 across both of its panels. But then there's also Windows Mixed Reality, and for those of you who haven't been following that, there was a whole first generation of WMR headsets, again using inside-out tracking with basically panels, very standardized optics panels and controllers developed by Microsoft and then distributed to partners like HP, like Dell, and like Samsung. And among those, a lot of that experience was very similar. They all use 1440 by 1440 panels for each eye, which was higher than the original Rift, but inside-out tracking, while good, was not great with its controllers. Its biggest fault were these kind of clunky, wand-like WMR controllers that had terrible battery life, very bad near-field tracking, blind spots based on the two inside-out cameras, and really made those headsets only ideal if you were to get like a Samsung Odyssey Plus for sim gaming, or a low-cost way to get into PC VR. Now, last year, HP mixed things up in the Windows Mixed Reality world with the Reverb G1, which was notable for its extremely high pixel density, high resolution panels. It used two 2160 by 2160 panels, and which essentially you could call it 4K, like how Pimax would call theirs 5K. It's not 4K by 4K, it's really 4K by 2K, but that's across a field of view here that was comparable to that of an Oculus Rift, not spread across their entire field of view. And what that meant was it was very, very high pixel density. These panels were only 2.9 inches diagonal. And that means very little screen door effect, incredibly crisp images that was really ideal for things like simulations where you need to read the dashboard and read these on-screen indicators and the geometry on these cockpits. Now, of course, it was still using the terrible Windows Mixed Reality controllers, still using that imperfect inside-out tracking, and so it was not an ideal headset despite the great panels. And that's where this year's Reverb G1 comes in, because while this is still on the Windows Mixed Reality platform and still using Windows Mixed Reality as the first level of software for then after which you would run Steam VR, is actually a partnership with Valve, developed in partnership with Valve and Microsoft to incorporate a lot of features that you might find in the Valve Index. So we're going to go through this kind of one feature at a time. Again, not final hardware, but enough to give you impressions as to what to expect. Let's start off with the display panels. Now, it's the same resolution panel and same size panels, so technically it should be almost the same amount of clarity as the Reverb G1. That's 2160 by 2160 on each eye across a 2.9-inch or so panel. And the big difference here is the optics, the lenses. And the lenses here, while they're not the same as the lenses that were in the Valve Index, they share a same kind of DNA. The lenses were actually developed by Valve for use with this high density panel. And so all the benefits of the clarity that we had been really taking for granted on the Valve Index, you actually get here. And what that means is if you're going to ask about sweet spot, it has a pretty good sweet spot. Now, to explain, sweet spot for me is not only about how much adjustment I need when I put this headset on to find focus at the center of the image, but also how much that image then stays clear throughout my own field of view. This is still a same field of view as the G1, so about 110, 114 degrees diagonal, less than that of the Valve Index or Pimax, but a lot of that image in the center stays clear. It does get blurry if you start looking in the peripheral, but it's sharp enough and clear enough that in Windows Mixed Reality, when I pull up my desktop, in big screen VR, when I pull up my desktop, I can actually read web pages. I can do some word processing in headset, something I could definitely not say was the case with the Rift S, and something that I didn't find all that comfortable even with the Valve Index for long periods of time. Now, one of the issues that we saw in the first gen Reverbs was this issue of Mira, and it was kind of an uneven issue, inconsistent issue in manufacturing across their headsets, especially in the first wave that went out to consumers. Mira, as perceived by users, was this issue between the lenses and the panels where it made the image, especially when you have bright images, like you could open up a big web browser or a document, when you have this swath of white and bright light, it would look a little bit muddied and blotchy in spots. It wasn't a screen door effect, and it wasn't chromatic aberration, but it was almost like you had these almost dirty spots on the lenses, where even if you try to wipe it clean, it would still be there. And as you move your head around, it would stick with the lens. That's definitely gone with this headset. And while I didn't notice a ton of Mira in my experience with the G1, I really tried to identify it with this G1 that I borrowed from Jeremy. The image definitely feels sharper. And I'm not sure if that's because this is a fresh off the production line. It doesn't have any of the kind of micro scratches that you might get over time on the lenses, but it just looked like a clearer image overall on this. HP actually says this is a different LCD panel than in the G1, even though it's the same pixel resolution and density and size. And with this panel, the space in between the RGB subpixels themselves and the pixels themselves is reduced to a point where that's where that Mira goes away. The panel is also supposed to be brighter, even though doing an A/B comparison in games, in Windows Mixed Reality, I couldn't really notice that as a meaningful difference. But one of the kind of subconscious differences is that because it's brighter, they actually don't need to light the pixels for as longer, and so they're supposed to be lower pixel persistence. So as you move your head around, you're supposed to get less smearing. Again, this isn't something, as I tried to notice it and tried to do A/B tests, I couldn't really see it as an apparent thing, but the headset was comfortable to use and wear over long periods of time, and so that could be just a long-term subconscious effect, because this is still running at 90 hertz. It's not 120 hertz or 144 hertz. Windows Mixed Reality is that first layer of software interface that you use with the G2. And unlike in SteamVR, there's not a ton of graphical adjustments you can do in terms of super sampling or changing the rendering resolution. But you can toggle a couple things. You can actually run this headset at essentially a quarter resolution, the 1440 by 1440, the first gen Windows Mixed Reality resolution, and then it upscales to the 2160 by 2160 if you want better frame rate, or you can also run this actually at 60 hertz as opposed to 90 hertz if you want to get better performance. I actually found it best to run it at the native resolution here, as well as at 90 hertz, and then in SteamVR adjust any rendering scaling, because if you start mixing things up and render, for example, Windows Mixed Reality at 1440 by 1440, and then do super sampling in SteamVR to try to balance that out, things start to get kind of messy. But all in all, the lenses and the panel here, I think, are definitely improved. I just don't think it's a night and day improvement from the G1, but in terms of how it stands alongside the Valve Index or even the Rift S, it is the sharpest and clearest headset by far, at least on the consumer PCVR space. Now, moving on, something you also notice is that there's a familiar speaker here. I'm not going to call it headphones because it is the same speaker system as in the Valve Index. Now, the actual form factor is a little bit different in terms of the way they're mounted, but this is the same audio drivers inherited from Valve, borrowed from Valve, that HP has now adopted, and it sounds so much better than the first gen HP Reverb G1, and just leagues above what you find on the kind of piped out audio on the Oculus Quest or the Rift S. The driver software isn't finalized yet, and something Jeremy noted when he was playing games like Beat Saber is the low end isn't quite there and didn't compare well to what's on the Index, but HP tells me that that's still being tweaked and the final product should have almost exactly the same audio experience as the Index, which is probably the best built-in headphone experience or speaker experience you can have right now. Now, unlike the G1, you can't plug your own headphones on here into a 3.5mm jack. That's just not available, but you can remove these if you really want to, and then kind of put on your own wired headphones if you have it plugged into your PC system. The fit and finish is also quite different. So it's slightly heavier than the G1, that was 1.1 pounds. This is 1.2 pounds, same weight as the Rift S, but still much lighter actually than the Valve Index, that's heaviest at 1.7 pounds or so. But I will say, while comfortable, it is definitely comfortable, and I think a lot of that is thanks to the new padding system. You can tell as I pop off the inside gasket, this actually looks very much like what you find on the inside of a Valve Index, even though it's obviously not the exact same fit. This material, though, is very similar, this soft cloth. Now, the external material, I love a lot from the Valve Index, and it feels pretty good on the Reverb G2, but the foam on the inside, I think, may still be a little different, maybe sourced from different suppliers. And that's especially noticeable not in the front of the headset, but in the back part of the headset. This is a little bit more of a rigid foam, not as soft as what I'd come to really love on the Valve Index, although it's a very similar head back brace form factor with these two split parts. What's different, though, from the Valve Index is there is no adjustment knob. And while you can adjust the fit of this, you can tell it's not a spring-based adjustment like you saw on the original Oculus Rift or the Valve Index, where you could then tighten it, or even on those headband designs like in PSVR or the Rift S. Here, you're basically unvelcroing it and sliding this out, and maybe it's due to the fact that this is not final production hardware. This is kind of the still prototype stage. I found this part to be a little bit clunky. This action here, just not as easy to adjust for comfort as I would have liked. And the ability to kind of pop this up 90 degrees while on paper, yeah, looks like it's useful. It's not nearly as useful to actually flip up the headset while I'm wearing it. It's not a headset I even wear with my glasses. This doesn't fit my glasses very well at all. And when I have it on, it's, I can kind of peek underneath the headset when I tilt this up, but I'm not tilting this up the full 90 degrees to then start using my keyboard. But it's being so lightweight at that 1.2 pounds, it's still very comfortable to wear for long periods of time, but it is one of those that I had to kind of work to get to be a perfect finish. And even things like the angular adjustment here, I wish was a little bit smoother like it is on the Valve Index, where, again, trying to find the angular sweet spot for clarity image is important when you're wearing a VR headset, and something that when I'm doing tweaking, that's most of my tweaking in headset is this movement, and that's just a little bit rigid here for my comfort. But again, don't know if that's because this is just a prototype. There's also no eye relief adjustment, so you can't push the lenses and display close to your eyes or further away from your eyes. That's a little bit disappointing. That again goes for comfort, and so your FOV is basically locked in, but there is adjustable IPD right here. It doesn't combine with Windows Mixed Reality in terms of software IPD and hardware IPD. It's just the hardware IPD adjustment here. So fit and finish, also it's a 6-meter cable, and the cable is much improved as well. Singular cord as opposed to that kind of two glued together pieces of cord from the first G1. And something that might be a little bit controversial is that the ports that you connect it to on your computer are DisplayPort, a full-size DisplayPort, and USB-C. Now, inside the box, they're going to include a full-size DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort adapter. So for laptops, for example, that only have the mini DisplayPort, that's going to work fine. But for a lot of people on their desktop PCs with slightly older motherboards, you may not have a USB-C connection for data and power. And even if you do, you might need to use the included AC power adapter, which HP recommends if you're not getting that full 6 watts. That's the requirement here, 6 watts of power. Some USB ports only have 4 watts, but most, if you're right on the motherboard, will have 15 watts, and that will be plenty. I didn't actually need to use the AC power adapter for any of my testing, but there won't be a USB-C to USB-A, USB 3.0 Type A adapter included. That's something you have to source yourself, or HP might sell to you. Now, moving on, tracking is improved in the system for sure. So you'll notice that they have 2 tracking cameras, inside-out tracking cameras on the front, as well as additional 2 tracking cameras on the outside. Now, positional tracking is still mostly done on these front tracking cameras. And so these tracking cameras on the outside are really for the new controllers and give you a better wide range of tracking with controllers, even though the controllers use the same tracking ring, illuminated tracking ring that you had with the first generation Windows Mixed Reality headsets. It doesn't have that kind of super ultra wide tracking camera on the top like you do have on the Rift S, but I didn't have any problem reaching over the back and using inventory in games like Walking Dead or Half-Life Alyx. It definitely felt like, in terms of wide range of movement, tracking was fantastic. Unfortunately, near field tracking, moving close up to the headset, right up the headset. If you're playing a game like Pavlov or Onward, you want to hold a pistol right up. That's still, while better than the first gen Reverb, it still starts floating around and you do lose tracking. I wonder if that's something that can be improved in software, because I think Oculus, for example, has done a fantastic job on the Rift S at doing prediction. And even though they also use 2 cameras on the front for inside-out tracking, when I could move those controllers up close, it actually tracks really well. And that's just not the case here. But controllers, that might be the best reason to be interested in this headset. And there's great news all around. First of all, this is a much better controller than the first gen Windows Mixed Reality headset. Like I said, it's the same tracking ring, actually illuminates, and that's still a little bit unfortunate because it does require 2 AA batteries, and so it's a little bit more power hungry, a little bit shorter battery life than you would find on your Valve Index controllers or even your Oculus Rift controllers, but it does crib a lot from the Oculus Rift design. So you have this really much smaller palm grip here, and on top you also have a thumbstick as well as 2 buttons, and also a menu button and your standard Windows button for Windows Mixed Reality. The buttons all feel fine. Trigger feels fine. It's not a capacitive touch trigger, and it's only a single action analog. So as opposed to the Valve Index, it's not a double action. So for example, in the Valve Index, you can squeeze the trigger and then get one final bit of action. Here, it's very much like the Oculus controllers, touch controllers, where it's just a single action, but not capacitive. The grip button works fine, much better than the grip button on the first gen Windows Mixed Reality, but compared to the touch controllers, I wish there was a little bit more throw to this for the analog. It feels like there's just a little bit. It's the subtlest thing, but I feel like Oculus has just nailed the sweet spot in terms of how much throw, how much action there is on the analog side, on the grip. And here, I wish there was just a little bit more. Thankfully, the thumbstick works great, and you can depress and move it into all the corners, so it doesn't have that kind of manufacturing defect that the Index controllers had at launch. HP is smart to address that. And it has, button parity. So if you're playing Half-Life Alyx, if you're playing any Steam game, you can basically program all of that stuff in. And I'm glad there is both the Windows button and the menu button, because you're going to need basically those buttons to tap into Steam, so you're not accidentally opening the Windows Mixed Reality menu when you're in Steam. It is layers on top of layers of software. The best news about these controllers, though, is that they are backward compatible with the G1 as well as other first-gen Windows Mixed Reality headsets. And so while the G2 is going to be HP's flagship for desktop VR headsets, it's not an essential upgrade if you already have the G1 and you're happy with the performance on that panel, those optics, because you'll have the option of buying the G2 controllers and then pairing with that headset. Or if you're happy with your Samsung Odyssey Plus, or if you're happy with your, Acer Windows Mixed Reality headset, you can actually buy these, although pricing hasn't been announced yet. We'll be doing a lot more testing, hopefully with the final production units when those get announced. Really excited to use this for games like Microsoft Flight Simulator, as well as Star Wars Squadrons, just because it's going to have that clarity and crispness for the interfaces, for cockpit games, and I'm loving using this so far this past week. Going back into a game like Half-Life Alyx, it feels so much more comfortable, even though I'm not playing at 120 hertz, 144 hertz, even though the field of view isn't as wide as in the Valve Index. That extra crispness and the extra clarity from this panel, it just increases my comfort, decreases my eye strain, and it makes me want to play more VR games at that resolution. So very excited for this. Thank you, HP, for sending me this prototype to check out. If you have questions about the G2, please post them in the comments. I'll have to return this to HP pretty soon, but I'll hopefully be able to do more tests, more comparisons, and we'll look forward to our review when the headset comes out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.